Oh, hello. My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. Oh boy, guys, this is a video that I have been ruminating on, thinking about how I wanted to do it for a month now. And I've really struggled with trying to figure out what the right balance here is between informing about a certain situation, talking about the issues that the situation kind of raises, and talking about what my response as a book reviewer and a member of the romance online community should be. I think trying to get into the nitty-gritty of every part of the situation that I'm talking about today, and I promise we'll talk about what that is here in just a second, I think trying to really dive into all of the details of exactly what happened and when and who, what, where, when, why is something that I may want to revisit in a future video. Right now I'm writing a series of video essays about the romance genre and topics of literary interest in the genre, and I think that this very well could be a whole video that I may do in the future, but I really want to talk about some of the kind of issues it raises, my thoughts about that, and what I am going to do in response to it. So I did think it was important to talk about this, and this being that there has been a real uproar, hoopla, whatever, about the RWA basically since December 23rd of last year. There was a precipitating ethics violation incident that was made public at that time, and the unraveling from there of exposing a lot of institutional bigotry, raising a lot of interesting questions about what a trade organization for writers should do, should be, can it serve everyone? What does it mean for a trade organization to censor online discourse from one of its member authors? What does this say about the state of the specific genre, which is romance, in terms of its representation of marginalized people? What is the right response for people who read the genre? I mean, there's just been a lot that has kind of unfolded from what is lovingly referred to on Twitter as the RWA shit show. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by giving you a brief overview. I'm going to use my description box vigorously in this video to give you a bunch of links that I think will be helpful in kind of giving you the full context of the situation, because it is very nuanced, detailed, difficult to describe succinctly, and I'm going to need to spend more time thinking about how to present that in a very efficient description at some point. But for now, I'm going to link a lot of resources in the description to give you the full context of the situation. Hey guys, editing me jumping in. You will see editing me a couple of times, I think, because surprising no one, more has happened in this whole saga since I filmed. The first thing I want to mention is that the blog Smart Bitches Trashy Books has a podcast, and they just finished releasing a 4-episode deep dive into this whole thing called RWA 1 month later, and I definitely recommend it. It's 4 episodes and it gives a few different perspectives on this whole thing. So the first one is from the leaders of SEMRA, who were key in kind of galvanizing and leading the charge to do a recall election for the interim president. So that's the first episode. The second episode is with the outgoing president, who left right when this whole thing was happening. Her name is Helen K. Diamond, who's work I have enjoyed in the past, and she, I think, provides some really helpful context in terms of what the policies and procedures do and don't say, as well as some clarification and context on some of the timeline of things. So there's that. The last episode was from Courtney Milan herself, processing the whole thing a month later, and I think it's pretty emotional. It's pretty raw, and I appreciated her having the opportunity to have a whole podcast episode of expressing just sort of how she feels at this point. So there's that. And then the third episode was a representative of the RWA, which I appreciated. I appreciated that there was an entire podcast dedicated to letting the RWA sort of speak for itself, where it's at, what it's planning to do. I do think that it's a pretty hard episode to listen to, because it's very clear that this person was not deputized to really speak with candor, and therefore it becomes a very PR-y, business jargony kind of conversation. But it was their opportunity to respond, and you can hear it, you know, sort of from their mouths in their own words, which I think can be helpful as opposed to just reading written statements. So I did want to mention in particular that series, because I think that it's a valuable resource in terms of hearing the actual people involved, what they're kind of thinking a month later. This is not what I would consider to be typical book Twitter drama. I mostly stay out of that, because I think it's just not a good use of time. I also think that Twitter tends to be extremely reactionary in terms of its responses to a lot of drama or a lot of problematic things. There's not a lot, there's very much a a mentality of this has one problematic element, now we're gonna be a hive mind and have no ability for a nuanced conversation. That's not what this situation is. Twitter has been basically the forum where people have the ability to speak out, and it's not a drama that started on Twitter. It is a drama that has been platformed on Twitter. That's kind of the distinction I'm making in my mind. But to me, this isn't typical book drama on Twitter. This is like raising some really serious questions and issues about what it means to be a responsible consumer and a responsible participant in the online bookish community. So I'm going to start with a brief description about what exactly happened now that I've been vague tweeting but live with you. I'm going to give you a brief description of what happened. Like I said, I will be referencing a lot of things in a description box. I'm going to really focus in on one specific topic that kind of arose from this whole thing. And then I'm going to talk about kind of where I see my ability to stand in solidarity, try to use my platform in a way that uplifts voices that I care about, and kind of how I'm going to proceed from there. So with that long ass preamble, let's get into the mind-blowing, the mind hole, the mind suck of the RWA shit show that unfolded over Christmas. Cast your mind back about 6 weeks ago. It's Christmas Eve. I am in my mother's house enjoying being off from work, having just arrived at our family seat to celebrate the holidays. And I noticed online, I just casually got on Twitter, I noticed online that one of my very favorite authors, if you watch this channel, you know that I talk about this author in the context of romance recommendations quite a bit, because I think she, just in terms of like on a technical level, is probably the best writer in romance right now, in terms of the quality of her prose, the depth of her thematic content, character development, etc. Just a very proficient writer, and one who I enjoy following on Twitter because she has interesting and thoughtful takes on things. So I happened to see that Courtney Milan had asked another author who I very much enjoy, Alyssa, to tweet out something on her behalf. And basically what that was that Courtney Milan, who has been a long time very vocal presence in what we call the Romancelandia community on Twitter, talking about issues of representation, marginalization, etc. in romance. Basically, she had been one of many voices criticizing a newly formed publisher hiring a specific editor back in the summer because of this editor's history of essentially co-signing on racist ideology. And this person, it's a whole thing. And like I said, I don't really want to get into all the details. And I think that if you look at the documentary evidence that Courtney was responding to, I think that it is a reasonable conclusion that from that body of evidence that one could conclude that this person was sympathetic to racist ideas. I don't know this person. That's all I can say, is that I think it would be a reasonable conclusion to draw based on what evidence was available. And I think it seems like Courtney Milan was trying to platform smaller authors who had specific complaints, was essentially trying to use her level of a platform online to highlight this problem and say, hey, in 2019, do we really want people who sympathize with these kind of ideas to be the ones who are making editorial decisions? This whole thing happened back in the summer. Based on that, what happened in the summer, the publisher filed an ethics complaint against Courtney Milan in the RWA, which is the Romance Writers of America. Basically, this is the largest trade organization for romance writers. It's basically the equivalent of an authors guild, or is it the NSFW, the sci-fi one that gives out the Hugos every year? It's that level of a organization. Courtney Milan had actually been in several leadership positions with this organization, had a long history with it, but basically an ethics complaint was filed against her by this publisher, and then also by an author who kind of got into the fray at some point when this whole dust up happened back in the summer, and it was surfaced hey, Courtney Milan is a woman of color. She is Chinese American. She is biracial, and she was specifically calling out this book that was originally published in 1999 but was republished in 2014 for having, typical racist tropes in it about Chinese women. And she surfaced that as a part of this whole dust up that happened on Twitter. And the publisher and the author both filed complaints against Courtney. Now, when you could go and read the complaints, they were inflammatory and almost ridiculous on their face. They basically were singling Courtney Milan out among several people who were all making these critiques, but they specifically singled out Courtney, and they were making a lot of inflammatory accusations against her. I think even the rhetoric of the complaint against her belied their underlying contempt for marginalized people, because it included saying allowing Courtney Milan to be in a leadership position on RWA would be the equivalent of having neo-Nazi in charge of the you in, or something to that effect. It was inflammatory language. The accusations did not make sense when you read the complaints. They did not make sense. And there's this question of, why is a publisher bringing an ethics complaint against an author in a trade organization about something that happened online on Twitter? So that whole thing went down. Long story short is that non-standard implementation of policy came from that. And as a result, even though the ethics committee found that Courtney Milan, that almost everything that they were saying in the complaint was not valid, they still found one piece of it that they agreed with, and therefore banned Courtney from leadership for life. I think she was suspended for a year, like incredibly harsh sanctions that typically are not leveled against a member of this trade organization unless they have like stolen money from someone. And basically the reason, so this all came to light on December 23rd, and the response of the community was like, okay, so wait, so when somebody of Chinese heritage goes online and says, I think that this book depicts Chinese women and perpetuates certain tropes that are, in her words, a fucking racist mess, when she says that online in her personal capacity, she's the one who gets censored. She's the one who gets banned from the organization. It just immediately created just this huge like uproar of like, whoa. Okay, maybe you don't like her tone. I mean, but is it your job to tone police her? Maybe you don't like that she's being so direct, but like she's acting in her personal capacity, not as a representative of this organization. Like, what does it mean for your trade, for your guild, basically, your trade union, for the thing that is closest that you have to a union to censor you for personal speech against a publisher? Like, I mean, this is just wild. Editing me back again. I did just also want to kind of double click into this point really quickly because Courtney Milan brought it up at the end of her podcast episode about the RWA 1 month later. So I do think that specifically around Courtney, but then I've also seen this a lot in the kind of subsequent discourse, there is a lot of tone policing. And I think, I don't know what's in people's hearts and minds, so I'm not going to speculate on that. I will say that is a well-known kind of tactic of people who are trying to deflect an underlying criticism or deflect from an underlying undisputed fact pattern, that often the tactic taken is, well, I don't like the way you're saying this. And what's hard is that I think often we don't want to have to be humble and just say like, you know what, in 1999, I thought that I was being respectful. With the benefit of hindsight and getting this feedback from people whose heritage this actually is, I can now see that maybe I was wrong about that. That was my bad. I'll do better. And honestly, that's all it really takes. And I think similarly, often when people feel uncomfortable with the criticism or the fact pattern that is being accurately described in this discourse, so frequently I've seen people being very defensive and saying, well, essentially the critique boiling down to, I don't like the way you're saying this. I just want to remind people who are not in marginalized communities, like, we don't have to deal with being humiliated or shut out or told that we're wrong or whatever. We're not dealing with that all the time. And if I was, I probably, would have days where I was feeling testy about things too. I would feel angry, I would feel frustrated, and critiquing or tone policing somebody's method of expressing anger is wrong. Like, it's not helpful and it's deflecting away from the underlying critique. And again, I don't know what's in people's hearts and minds, but that is often a tactic used to minimize the critique and try to brush it away. So I think that has been something that's been very frustrating or disheartening, is rather than absorbing something and allowing yourself to see from someone else's point of view, there's just this like, oh, you're not being polite. Oh, you're not being nice. Oh, you're not doing whatever. I think especially as women, we have so much pressure on ourselves to be nice that when another woman violates that code, we feel entitled to judge them, critique them, and discount anything that they're saying. And that has been very frustrating. And Courtney Milan specifically talked about that in her podcast as something that's really bothered her. And I think that that has been true about the subsequent discourse. And I think that that's basically a huge part of the initial issue, is this idea of tone policing, which is just not helpful. So very quickly from this point on, and I just realized that I don't think I've summed that up very succinctly, but you get my meaning that this is very complicated. From this point on, what happened was just that at every juncture that the RWA had to make things better, to stop the bleeding, to try to make things right, they just seemed to consistently continue to make a choice that did the opposite of that. And because of that, because they could not say like, we were wrong, here's what we're doing to review this. Like, here's what we're doing. Because they could not just get the crisis under control, it continued to spiral out for weeks, basically. And that's part of why I've delayed making this video, because honestly, there was just new things coming out every day. And what came to light was just a ton of marginalized creators, a ton of marginalized authors finally feeling like they could really start saying out loud what had been kind of spoken behind doors about, here's a situation where I was racially profiled at a convention and told that I didn't belong there. Here's an example where the nice white ladies told me I couldn't sit with them at their table. Here's an example of where I filed an ethics complaint against somebody being a homophobic jerk to me and nothing was done. Here's, like, it just was example after example after example, because it just sort of opened this Pandora's box of something that people knew this about the RWA. There's been a number of controversies around this organization in the last couple of years around diversity and inclusion. And I think what's ironic / tragic about this whole thing is that actually Courtney Milan had been a huge voice of raising these issues and rebuilding a lot of trust within marginalized communities of like, okay, this has been a problem. Here's what they are doing to fix it. And people like Courtney and people like some of these new board members that are coming in are going to be a part of the solution to make sure that this is not a problem going forward. So there have been issues in the past, but people had essentially largely decided to let bygones be bygones and say like, okay, we're going to start fresh. And just the fact that this happened, so Courtney Milan was a huge part of that. She actually had received a service award in 2019 for her work on this from the RWA. And the fact that she was essentially like pilloried, because there's a strong feeling, I think, that she represents a new perspective in romance that many members of this organization are just not comfortable with, and we will get there. And that's what I, in theory, want to spend most of this video talking about. But I think because of her symbolic significance to both sides of this issue, to the nice white ladies who don't want their organization to change, to include people who don't look like them, have their same life experiences, she represents change to them. But she also represents change, I think, to a lot of the marginalized creators in that community, in that organization. And because she was the one who this happened to, I think that this took on a symbolic freight to it that maybe it would not have with a different member. But because it was Courtney, it opened up this entire like just cavalcade of basically culture clash. And it's so interesting because these institutions that have been around for a long time, I think this is something that a lot of them are having to go through, of really confronting the fact of, okay, like we want to make this a safe space for marginalized people, for marginalized authors, whoever. But to do that, it means making other parts of our membership uncomfortable, because at some core part of them, they don't want this organization to be welcoming to that group. And this just really, I think, brought that tension to a head. I don't know what the future of RWA is at this point. Like I said, it seems to me, from my perspective as an outsider, that every chance they've had to do the right thing, they seem to have not done that. And that's really sad. This is an organization that, with, you know, its flaws are many, but it definitely has been a very powerful organizer for independent authors in a genre that doesn't get a lot of respect from mainstream forces. It gives grants every year to help with literary studies of the romance genre, to try to build up some of the academic study of the genre. It has negotiating power with Amazon. Like it's been able to help get some issues there resolved for its members. When different independent publishers have not been able to pay authors, it has been a big force in trying to remediate that. In fact, there's a major situation right now with a press called Dream Spinner that is not getting addressed by the RWA in the way that it should. And that was another piece of this whole implosion. Was the interim president, the person who kind of ended up being president, was one of the main authors of that press. And a lot of questions were arising about conflict of interest and also this person's qualifications to even be in a leadership position. Basically, it's a mess. And the reason why the hashtag has been hashtag RWA shit show is that every day something new and something disheartening comes up about this entire situation. So with all that being said, where we stand kind of at the end of January, early February, is that a huge portion of the board has quit. I think at this point there's been at least 10 board members who have quit or have been asked to step down. Key members of the staff have had to step down from RWA. A huge number of people have either already quit their RWA memberships or are basically just maintaining membership to be able to vote in a recall election. And I think at minimum, trust has been just completely broken with the membership and the leadership at this point. So all that to say, this whole situation, however, has surfaced a couple of issues, and that really is in theory where I want to spend most of my time talking. I feel like I've talked a lot. Hopefully I have edited that down into something vaguely more coherent, but I want to shift now that you have the kind of context of where I'm coming from, of what has made me think about some of these things. I want to talk about one specific thing that has come up out of this. So the thing that I specifically want to kind of wrestle through or talk about is, what does this say about where we are as a romance reading community in terms of consumption, in terms of reviewing, etc. There's so many places we could go with this. The one thing that I feel like I can speak to as, a white, cishet, upper middle class, like I live in a tremendous position of privilege within the romance genre because romance is squarely directed at me. That is who is reflected in the novels. I am so much in the position of privilege in terms of I see myself everywhere in romance literature. So what does it mean for me to use that position of privilege within who romance is written for, but also my privilege as, a romance reviewer with a pretty good platform and someone who I think I'm known for my romance content, that those are always, some of my best viewed videos of ones where I specifically am talking about romance. I review also on the Read Bliss channel, which is run by Harlequin. So, I have a platform and how do I think about this entire thing? Because one thing that got brought up, and this is kind of where I feel like I can at least speak to this piece, because I can't speak to the position of being a marginalized creator, a marginalized author, a marginalized reader. That's not where I'm coming from. What I can speak to is one of the accusations that has been leveled several times against people who are white or cishet or whatever, trying to be allies to marginalized voices, is you're just doing that to be PC. You're only reading these books to be PC, or to basically the insinuation being in your heart of hearts, you know that these books are inferior, they're not as good. You're just reading them to make yourself feel virtuous, like virtue signaling, basically. Reading as virtue signaling is basically the accusation leveled here. I thought that Alona Andrews had a tweet chain that I thought summed up where that accusation specifically is coming from, that I wanted to read because I thought that this just really summed up the reality of where that accusation comes from. And what Alona Andrews said was, think of RWA as an ecosystem. Authors have learned to survive within this ecosystem. Certain types of romances are popular and others are not. Most people try to write what is popular because it's commercial fiction. Now we introduce a new type of romance with a woman who is inserting a modern belief system into a historical romance with a woman who's not white, romance with a woman who's an immigrant or lesbian or doesn't want children. This romance is slowly growing in popularity. Most authors embrace it because the field that doesn't grow dies. But some authors view it as threatening their ability to earn money and therefore their survival. They do not know how to cope with changing conditions. They write what they always write, and suddenly their work, which used to meet all the criteria of a popular romance, is being critically examined and often compared to the newcomers. From their point of view, there is more competition for shelf space, awards, and reader money. That segment will fight against the change within the ecosystem. They will do it viciously and brutally because they are convinced that their survival is in doubt. If you read the original complaint with this in mind, you will see it. Romance and fiction in general is not a zero-sum game. The new books are not popular because they are written by some social subset. They are popular because they are good books, and this is what I want to emphasize, that appeal to readers. Because readers see someone like them in a narrative. No amount of committees will change this. The preferences of the audience are shifting. They will not regress. So this is why this is so stark, and this is why they banned Courtney for life. But I thought that that was such a good way to set this conversation. And what I want to say is that what Alona Andrews tweeted is exactly right. The reason why this fight is getting so vicious and it is raising up so many things is because it's not just a competition for ideology, It's a competition for dollars. It is a competition of, wait, so I have been able to write the same type of scenarios, the same type of characters, the same types of settings over and over and over again, and they were popular and they were what people liked and people bought them and nobody questioned my intentions about them. Now all of a sudden you have a new generation of readers, and that's where I think I kind of want to speak to. You know, I'm a mid-millennial. I'm 32 and I am the future of romance in terms of the readership. I am part of that future. And frankly, I don't just want to read about nice, rich white ladies finding love with alpha heroes. That was what was popular for a very long time, and you know, I will defend those books because I have so many thoughts about them and their history, but the genre is evolving, and the reason it's evolving is because the readership is evolving. People my age or younger are used to, in their books, seeing characters that do not look like them. I, not only in my books, but in my world, I live in a city. On either side of me in the house that I live in are interracial couples. That is something that and I live in the South. Maybe that is something that would not have been possible 20 years ago or whatever, but like diversity as such is normal for me. So maybe I'm not seeing me in a romance, but I am seeing people I know, people I love, people I care about, people I interact with every day in my romances. I'm not gay, but I have plenty of friends who are. So when I'm reading a book about a gay couple or that features a gay couple, I'm not seeing myself, but I am seeing people that are friendly, that are known, that are comfortable. And I think that's what the difference is. There's this perception that, oh, you're just reading that because it's virtue signaling, basically. No, I'm reading it because of two factors. One that is ideological, but one that is very practical. Ideologically, I want to see people that I know and care about reflected in my books. And that includes people who don't necessarily look like me. Also ideologically, just as a matter of justice, and maybe we can come back to this here in a minute. But then just on a very practical level, books that are always the same eventually get boring. Yes, romance has a cajillion subgenres and variants, and part of commercial fiction is repeating tropes. I'm not saying every book has to be super unique. I don't think that that's what commercial fiction readers are really coming to their books for. They're coming for a sense of familiarity and seeing the small variations that each author does on this very well-known theme. But I think the difference and the generational divide here is that my idea of what those variations can and should look like include elements of diversity that help make these books freshly interesting. It is a fresh and interesting thing for me to see where the divide between the hero and the heroine is not just that one of them has power in the form of wealth and one of them doesn't. That's something that we've seen for a long time. Another interesting variation on that is one of them has power in the form of legal status and one of them doesn't, maybe. I mean, that could be an interesting conflict. Maybe one of them has status because one of them is out and one of them is closeted. Whatever. I mean, what I'm looking for are more interesting variations on themes beyond just the set character types and the set tropes that we have seen for 40 years in the genre. This is just a new era and a new way of expanding on existing formulas. Like, you can purely take any ideology out of this and just talk about this as an expansion of what's interesting in books and expanding the possibilities of the different variables at play in a book. But then let's come back to that ideology bit. Maybe, I don't know if I want to quite go here, but to me, diversity in romance is one of the most important genres we could see diversity in, because at its core, romance is a domestic novel. It's a novel about day-to-day life, day-to-day people, things, there are certainly categories of romance where there is, sci-fi and fantasy and magic and whatever, like paranormal, all of that, like that can happen. But at its core, a lot of what romance is about are people that you know in your day-to-day life, finding somebody to be with and to start a family with, not in the sense of always having to have kids necessarily, but really romance is about expanding a community. And that's why so often I talk about like family dynamics in romance novels or these kind of more domestic novels as being what's really interesting to me. You are starting a new community in a romance novel. And maybe that community includes children at some point. It doesn't have to, but in a romance novel, it often does. But it's also bringing two different families together, or bringing two different friend groups together, or integrating into a community in a new way. That is what the conclusion of a romance romance novel is. And that is something that we all do in our lives. So even if we never end up with a partner, romance is one of the only genres that really celebrates those little relational connections that are part of what make us feel like we are a part of the world around us. And for romance to not represent every kind of person as a part of what it means to form new communities is wrong, in my opinion, and really harmful, because basically the definition of a romance novel is a happily ever after, like people coming together and being happy together. And that is something that we should be wanting for everyone, and we would want to see everyone reflected in. I definitely have critiques about specifically male-male romance in the romance genre in a context where the readership is overwhelmingly cis-het women, and it's a genre that's even written by cis-het women for the most part. Like, I have critiques of that, but I do think that if nothing else, it is very important and a good sign that there is movement towards including two men being together as meeting the definition of happily ever after, that is a happy ending when these two men find love together and start a new community together. That is something that is a force of good, even if I have critiques of it. To me, the whole point of reading and writing about characters who are not like you is affirming our shared humanity. And that's, to me, romance does that maybe more than any other genre. It affirms our shared humanity because it affirms our shared human experience that we want love and community. That's what the genre is about. And so to me, just ideologically, it is so important that is a piece of what this genre is doing, is saying yes to whatever you look like, whatever your ableness is, whatever your legal status is, whatever your religious, whatever. To be human is to desire to be loved and a part of a community, and we are saying yes to that. So ideologically, like, fuck yeah, it is important to me that there is diversity in romance. Like, yes, that is important. And to act like that is some sort of virtue signaling or window dressing or whatever for books that are not as good is just such bullshit. It is so bigoted. It is wrong. And we need to loudly say no to that. And that has been happening, will continue to happen, because we're not going back. We're past that. So like, if what you want is to turn the dial back 20 years and say, well, it would be nice if people would just stop complaining that the same people are always represented in these books. I'm tired of this, like, angry that people aren't buying my books the same way that they used to because this isn't enough for them. Like, that's not gonna happen. And I don't really know what to tell somebody who that's how they feel about it, because the train has left the station. It's not coming back. And really what you're doing is standing on the rails, shaking your fist at the caboose because it's gone. Like, this is where we're going, and you can either wait for the next train and get to the same destination, or you can stand there until you have to jump out of the way of the next train. Like, I don't know what to tell people about this. This is where things are heading. That is ideal. That's sort of like my response to that specific critique that I feel like I can make, because it's speaking to me as the person of privilege who these books are written towards. Like, in general, the genre is written towards people like me. And really a lot of what this question is about is what do people like me want? And I want to be somebody who stands up and says, what I want is more inclusion. I want more people being represented in my books, and I want more authors who don't look like me to have opportunities to tell me stories. That is what I want as a consumer. With all that being said, with all that ruminating out of the way, practically my final question to myself is like, what can I do? I'm not a member of the RWA. I'm not a writer. Like, what can I do to stand in solidarity, to be in support of generally the idea that marginalized voices need to be heard in the romance community, that we can take something that was just a shit show and try to transform it into a moment of positive change and building the community that we want to see in Romancelandia. And I'm not an author or a member of the union, but I am a reviewer and I am a reader. Definitely a reader. I am those things. So what can I do? First of all, I want to mention there are so many accounts out there that are dedicated to trying to lift up marginalized voices in romance. I'll just look at the description box. I'll have all the links there. I also want to mention that part of what we need to be doing is not only reading from diverse authors, looking for new voices with authors, looking for new voices with characters, but also with reviewers and people who are talking about books. I'm going to link a few of my favorites below. And then I thought, maybe the most tangible thing I can do is to at least host for 2020 some read-alongs and to read some good books. And guys, here's the thing. thing. It's not hard. Like, part of what I want to create this year, I guess, is resources of saying, like, there's a shit ton of authors who are doing interesting things with marginalized characters, who are marginalized, whatever. Like, there's plenty. And I thought that I'm calling this We Need Diverse Romance, thinking through We Need Diverse Books, which has been a huge movement in the YA sphere. And I think is part of the quote unquote problem from certain people's perspective of it has raised an entire generation of people who are used to seeing diverse perspectives reflected in their fiction through YA reading, and as they are aging into adult novels are looking for the exact same thing. So I thought that just We Need Diverse Romance could be a good, short, snappy idea. I think that that's something that has been kicked around previously, so by no means unique to me, but I just resonated with that as the title. So my We Need Diverse Romance challenge this year, so every month I'm going to pick a main book where I am going to have a forum open on my Discord. So I will just keep it pretty cash. It'll be a pretty cash book club, but just pick like a main book for the month for people who are interested reading a romance. Maybe you don't normally read romance, but you're interested in trying. I think most of these are going to be pretty friendly points of entry depending on your taste. In January, the book that I read for this, and I didn't have a Discord going because I hadn't made this video yet, was The Suffragette Scandal by Courtney Milan. And let me just pause and say she's been the epicenter of this. I started this by saying I thought she was one of the most impressive writers in romance. If you've not read Courtney Milan, please do. Like, she is so great. If you like a angsty, I don't even really like angsty historicals, but I like her angsty historicals because she's so great. So definitely you can go there. But I do have a schedule for the first few months here. So I wanted to start with some of the folks who have been central to this entire thing getting kicked up. So Courtney, I read in January. In February, my pick is A Princess in Theory by Alyssa Cole. I really wanted to pick The AI Who Loved Me because I've been dying to listen to that on Audible, but I didn't feel like I should pick something you had to get Audible for. I'm just gonna read that on my own. But A Princess in Theory is one I keep meaning to get to from Alyssa Cole, and I just keep not doing it, so we're gonna do it this month. So that will be the February pick. Olivia Waite, I think, was a good voice in surfacing some of the complaints that have been raised about homophobia that haven't been addressed. And her novel last year, The Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics, is about two lady astronauts who fall in love. So in like ye old history past. So I think that should be fun. So this is going to be the March pick. April, I thought we could do a Kindle Unlimited, like celebrating diversity on Kindle Unlimited, because there's a shit ton of voices on Kindle Unlimited. And if you have that, you should be reading. I also wanted to pick a paranormal somewhere in here. So I'm going to go with Her Scottish King by Theodora Taylor. I read Her Scottish Wolf back in the day. So this is the sequel. So I thought that might be fun. And then May, June, July, I thought we could celebrate new releases, like new books coming out. Girl Gone Viral by Alisha Ray comes out in April, and we'll read it in May. And I've read another book from her in the past that I just like. Her writing is... So that's going to be the pick for May. For June, it's going to be Real Men Knit. So that book comes out in May, but that if we read it in June, it'll give people time to get it. And this just looks super fucking cute. And then July is going to be Take a Hint, DANI Brown by Talia Hibbert, and that one comes out in June. We'll read it in July, and I love Talia Hibbert. She wrote one of my, like, the paranormals I think of most fondly, which was Mating the Huntress, which I highly recommend. She's also all over Kindle Unlimited, so if she hadn't had a big release coming out this year, I would have picked one of hers. But anyway, so those are the first few picks. If you're interested in participating, definitely keep your eye on the Discord. We will be having little book clubs about that each month. And then I definitely have some other ideas, like I want to read Rafe by Rebecca Witherspoon, I think is her name. I've not read anything from her yet, but I've heard that one is fantastic. And same for, I think it's The Long Shot by Kennedy Ryan. Kennedy Ryan was actually one of the first, in 2019, the first time any Black women had ever won a Rita Award, which is the award given out by the RWA. And she was one of the winners. So I've been meaning to try something from her. She's also on Kindle Unlimited, by the way. So I think we'll probably pick, I think it's called The Long Shot, as one of the ones at some point. But anyway, I have a lot of ideas of different ones we'll pick for book club. Basically, it's not a hardship thinking of books that qualify. So I figure if nothing else, this is something concrete I can do to, try to platform and be talking about this issue throughout the year. But it's also just like not a hardship. There are so many books that include diversity in some way that have been huge in romance the last few years. I didn't include Helen Huang on this because I just feel like she has enough of a platform right now. But I mean, I think part of what's been so exciting about her books taking off is that they have just so much diversity in them in ways that make make the stories, like they drive conflict and they make the stories so interesting. Like her books have neurodiversity in terms of autism rep. We get a new insight into kind of the Vietnamese American experience in her books. We have in the Bride Test, like this very interesting dynamic of like legal status that drives a lot of the conflict. Like it's been super cool to see her books taking off, and there's nothing PC about people enjoying those books. They're just interesting books, and the fact that they have new perspectives is a part of what helps make them interesting. Like this is the part that drives me crazy about this argument. I'm like, so what you're saying is that because I like something new, it means I'm being like, ugh. I have been talking so long, and I hope I am able to edit this down to something vaguely coherent. I did just want to talk about this on the channel because I have not seen this discussed much on Booktube. I do think that it's really important, and it's something that I want to, I've been very vocal about it on Twitter and on Instagram, but I did want to put it on here since this is my main channel and just say that I think that this is a really important issue that has arisen. Of course, I'm not glad this happened because it's very sad. It's taken a lot of energy, and it seems like it's probably going to kill a trade organization that I think has been an important voice of advocacy for a group of writers who are not taken seriously often by mainstream culture. So that's really sad. This is a really sad situation in a lot of ways, but I'm hoping that it can, if nothing else, catalyze and bring awareness to the fact that reading diversely is not window dressing. It's not something people do just cause. It's not a bingo board. Something I feel like there's this narrative around reading diversely as like a chore. It's not a chore. It's just a part of what people want to read, and those people are not always part of the marginalized groups being represented. Like this is just a part of genre that is evolving and people having varied tastes. There we go. Hopefully something in that made sense. I hope you guys found this somewhat interesting, even if you're not a part of Romancelandia or have not been following this controversy. I hope this was somewhat interesting. Definitely let me know any of your thoughts below. Give me any recommendations that you might have for good books for the book club. Definitely feel free to leave that below. And yeah, I think that will do it for now. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, along with all of the resources that I mentioned. They will be in the description box, and definitely go check out some of the other creators that are going to be linked there. There's been so much great coverage of what's been going on, and you should definitely go check all of those folks out. But yeah, I think that will do it for now. So I hope you are having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye.